episode, we're speaking with Mariam Khalili, and she's here to share her personal story. Mariam is the new executive director for Malachi's Message. She's also a holistic realtor in the Houston Woodlands area. And I am Emily Rochelle, the president of Malachi's Message. So welcome, and thank you for watching today's episode. Hi, Mariam.
Hi,
How are
thanks
you?
for having me. I'm good. I'm good. A little nervous to be in the hot seat, but happy to be here and to talk about something really important.
Yes. Before we dive into your mold story, can you kind of share with everybody what your life was like before the exposure?
Oh my gosh. Yes, this is a little bit of a tricky question as I have discovered a lot of other moldies, as some of us refer to ourselves as. It's tricky because once you go through a really intense exposure, you reflect back on your life and other periods of time that you may have been exposed to mold, and that's why you might have been sick. So I definitely fall into that category. I have met people where they've only had one big exposure that they're aware of, but now I can say I have been exposed many times throughout my life. And a lot of missing puzzle pieces for me have kind of come together at this point. But prior to my really big exposure, where I made the discovery that mold was what was causing all of my illness, I was doing really well. I had been sick off and on throughout my life. I had been previously diagnosed with major depression and anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder. And so I felt like I had this curse that had been following me for periods throughout my life that would just seemingly come and go at random. And then I went through a period where suddenly I was just doing really well. I was very happy. I was very healthy. I had gotten a job as a teacher, was working, doing that. So it was very, being a teacher is hard, but I really loved what I was doing. I felt myself very happy. I went and got into nonprofit work, was thriving, and was generally very healthy, able to work long hours, really career driven, was just thriving, and got to a point where I was actually able to have a child. And I had previously been told by doctors in the past that my hormones were not where they needed to be, and that if I ever did want to have children, I would have to have them probably in my 20s, or I would need to go something like the IVF route because I was going to struggle if I ever wanted to have kids. So I actually believed that that wasn't possible, that I was not going to have children. I had been single for most of my adult life. And so I was at a really great place the last couple of years before I got sick, where life was wonderful. I mean, I was working as executive director for two different nonprofits, uh, public speaking, going to fundraisers, planning these big events, having a wonderful rapport with people. Their anxiety wasn't part of the equation. Depression wasn't part of the equation. I wasn't having severe digestive issues. I've always been pretty focused on a holistic path, a holistic diet and lifestyle since about 2006, when I was dealing with unknown health issues back then that nobody had the answers for. And then, you know, I was just generally really well. It wasn't until after I had my daughter that things started to fall apart when we moved. And so I went from being really healthy and feeling on top of the world, feeling like I had conquered this event that would never happen in my life, becoming a mom without any assistance, and went from being really at the highest of highs to the lowest of lows. And after all of those experiences, I now look back and can say I wasn't cursed. I was just being poisoned by my environment in different times throughout my life. And it's, interesting now, because my family members and I can go back and say, oh my gosh, when I was, 22, we were living in this house and we were also sick. And we can go back and recall, the roof leak and the crawl space that wasn't done correctly and all of these other things from, looking at what was that dwelling like. And then all of us can tick off the check boxes. So, um, that's kind of what my life was like before this most recent episode where I got very, very sick.
And so when you moved into this home, which you're about to discuss, were you made aware? Did the landlord ever tell you that there was any past water damage or leaks or problems with the house?
No, and I can say that this is just a really unfortunate issue that takes place all across the state and probably all across the country. I know in Texas, a landlord does not have to provide a seller's disclosure. They don't have to tell you anything about the prior history of the home if you're a tenant. If you're buying the house, that's different. You have a right as a potential buyer to see and access all of the information regarding the history of that home. And a seller or owner is legally obligated to share and disclose what they know. So as a renter, I did not know what was going on. I had just had my daughter at end of 2019, and she was just amazing, perfect, healthy, just thriving. And of course, as we all know, the world kind of went crazy at the beginning of 2020. We were all forced into lockdowns, and I suddenly was forced to start working remotely. And so I was with my daughter every single day. So I was able to really evaluate her and be with her. And she was so extroverted, so happy. She was talking at 4 months saying mama, which was apparently very strange to have mama. You know, it's not something that a lot of babies do. I didn't know this, first time mom. But everybody just was praising, like, oh, this is so wonderful. Your daughter said mama as her first word. And it was wonderful. She had had a tongue tie revision the month prior and hadn't been able to make any sound. So she went from being completely mute because of her tongue and lip and buccal ties to saying mama at 4.5 months of age. And she continued to pick up words. She was walking at 9 months, extremely extroverted, loved everybody, would blow kisses and wave, and just we would go to the chiropractor, and she was like the chiropractor's assistant. She would, walk over there and put her hands on the other babies to try to console them and make them feel good, and just was always smiling and always happy. Really just such a sweet little person. And I decided, we were living in a little 2-bedroom bungalow downtown Houston area in a really beautiful neighborhood called the Heights. And we had been under lockdown. And I said, you know what? I just want to get us into a new house, get my mom under the same roof with us. We can all be together. And so I moved us out to the suburbs into this beautiful ranch home, 1960s ranch style home. And it was recently renovated, flipped. It looked beautiful inside, all modern finishes, modern flooring. And I just felt on top of the world. I mean, we were all really healthy, we were all thriving, and now we could all be under the same roof together and actually, support one another. And my daughter could have a yard to play in. So it was just a big celebration for me. We moved her and I and my mom in together when my daughter was between 9 and 10 months old. And by the time she was 13, 14 months, she had completely changed. She had stopped speaking. Previously, she was able to copy me if I said, Mama loves the baby. She would say, Mama baby, and clap. And she would follow me around the house and help me with laundry. I could tell her, roll the ball to mommy, and she'd roll it. And after, this period of several months, she couldn't do any of those things anymore. She wasn't waving anymore. She had become violent, aggressive. She stopped eating. She only wanted fruit, only really sweet things. And she was still drinking milk, 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 milk all the time. Every 2 to 3 hours, we had to have milk. And this went on until past the age of 3 with the milk. But while we were in this home, I watched her go from just being a really healthy, happy, normal child that seemed to be advanced to severe regression. And took her to our family doctor, where I was also a patient. And she said, well, because it's COVID, everybody's wearing masks, she could be experiencing some speech delay because of that. And my question was, but she was speaking before. So this isn't a delay. There's like a miscommunication or a disconnect here. I'm not able to convey to the doctor because every person I spoke to said, oh, it's COVID time. We have masks. she's not going to be speaking. And my response to that was, well, we're home all the time and I don't wear a mask and my mom doesn't wear a mask when we're in our house. She sees our facial expressions, she sees our mouths, and she was speaking before. And, the symptoms just continued to stack on. Uh, I had a busted lip every week from her, throwing her head back and hitting me so hard because she was no longer controlling her body the way that she had been before. Her dad would come to see her, and it was like he was suddenly a stranger. She didn't want to play with him. Everyone was invisible except for me, which, thank you, God, that was such a blessing because she still acknowledged me, still gave me affection, still made eye contact with me, but no one else was getting that treatment anymore. And this just continued on. I really didn't know what was going on. And my health was plummeting. I didn't know why I was suddenly so sick, but I never made the connection between the two as having some kind of a correlation because they were so different. My issues were very much digestive in nature. In the beginning, I went from being able to eat almost whatever I wanted. I was pretty much following a paleo diet, but I got to where I couldn't even have red meat anymore. I couldn't have fruits or vegetables anymore. Even water got to a point where I would have such severe inflammation in my chest and esophagus that I felt like life isn't worth living because I can't even drink water. And we lived in this house for a year and a couple of months. Um, I noticed a lot of strange odors while we were in this house that nobody else seemed to, notice. And I know I've got a special nose. A lot of us moldies have them. Uh, it's kind of like when you're pregnant, suddenly your sense of smell becomes so heightened. And mine was like that. And it's been that way my whole life. So I was picking up on things that I just couldn't make sense out of. And I went to the emergency room several times during this period of time. I had been to my doctor. We had done all of the normal blood work. Everything always came back fine, except my autoimmune markers were showing lupus. And I had developed this horrible red rash on my face that no one could explain. And I was frustrated. I was trying to work. I had just started my real estate career and I didn't know what was going on. So when it came time for our lease to end, I decided, okay, I'm going to get us out of here, get us into a different house. And as we were moving out, that's when I started to notice the water damage on the floors. It was like the floors were buckling and they were engineered style wood floors. And then the musty odors started to hit me. The more furniture that we took out, the more boxes that we carried out of the house, the odors started to just overwhelm me. So what I had been sensing was finally becoming evident and apparent to my mom and to friends that were there helping to move. And I said, oh my gosh, I think there's mold in this house. And I'm so glad that we're getting out of here. And I had a practitioner tell me, do you think that there's a possibility that there's mold where you're at? And I just said, I don't know. And I was so sick and so poor because I had been so sick. I wasn't able to work. I wasn't able to bring in an income because I had gotten to a point where I lost 30 pounds in 1 month because of how sick I got and how reactive I was to all foods. And I mean, I was living on activated charcoal and distilled water with mineral drops, just trying to survive until we decided to get out of this house. And my anxiety was through the roof. That curse that I mentioned kind of following me throughout my life, it felt like it was coming back. And I was experiencing this massive anxiety and depression bomb, and I didn't understand why. But of course, a lot of people will say it's because of COVID. You're not able to live a normal life anymore. You're, forced to be at home. And so it's your body's natural stress response is going to manifest all of these things. So in my mind, I thought, okay, I have anxiety and depression, and I cannot eat food because of my anxiety and depression. I just really didn't know. And once we moved out and those musty odors hit me, it's like the wheels kind of started turning a little bit. But I still wasn't educated on mold. I didn't know what to look for. I didn't know what warning signs to look for when moving into a house. And of course, the landlord never told me anything about potential issues going on in that current home. And then the landlord for the new home that I was moving into, I did see water damage along the baseboards, but everything was dry. So I said, well, this is a rental home and there's going to be cosmetic issues because there always are in rental homes. And, you know, a lot of landlords, they don't go in behind every tenant and make everything beautiful again. And the house that we were moving into, it was gorgeous. The baseboards were the only warning sign. And I said, okay, it's dry. He said that there was a flood event 2 years, 3 years prior, but everything was taken care of. There's no more leaks. And it was a plumbing event that happened. So I said, okay, that sounds, you know, simple enough. And I moved in, and within 3 days, I stopped having the crazy digestive issues. And so I said, okay, it was that house that was making me sick. And I just got better and better to where I could drive my car more easily. I wasn't having the same levels of anxiety anymore. And about 2 months into that house, we noticed mold growing out of my mom's bathroom and out of her bedroom ceiling. And these were two completely separate rooms. They were not attached. There was actually a room in between them. So it was two separate water events causing this mold. And we called in the homeowner, landlord. He brought in an inspector. They investigated. They did a really terrible inspection of the rest of the house and ignored everything that I pointed out to them, and proceeded to do an improper remediation, which at the time I didn't know it was not correct. Now, looking back and after all the time and research that I've spent educating myself, I can look back and say, absolutely, that was a botched remediation that was not done to Texas Administrative Code. And in the process of that remediation taking place, it's like I went back 100 steps and worse. I got extremely ill. My mom started to have a lot of health problems pop up, and my daughter was now stimming. I didn't know it was called stimming though, because again, all of this was very new and people were still saying, oh, she's just behind because of everything going on in the world.
I want to cut in real fast.
Yeah.
When you say it was botched remediation and you took 100 steps back, is it because they did remediation without containment?
Yeah, there was not a containment.
Okay.
Since it was in the bathroom, is the area that they were going to remediate. It was a spot probably 2 to 3 inches by 1 to 2 inches. And it literally was like the mold was trying to break through the sheetrock above the toilet. So there was a leak in that area. And so they wanted to take out the toilet, remove the sheetrock there, fix the leak, and then replace everything. And so what they did was they just put plastic up with a zipper and then turned on the exhaust fan for the bathroom. There was no actual containment around that area. People coming in and out were not wearing any type of PPE or protective covering. Sometimes multiple people would go in at a time and come back out. And this was not a half bath. It was like a secondary bathroom with a bathtub shower enclosure. It wasn't very big. And it was right in the entrance to my mother's bedroom as well, and the second bedroom. And so knowing what I know now, there should have been a secondary containment set up outside of that area with some type of negative pressure system, pulling that air out with an air scrubber. And none of that was put in place at all. After they completed their quote unquote remediation, then they had us vacate the house for 24 hours so that they could do a fogging treatment. And they fogged the whole house. I do not know what product was used, but I know when I came back to the house, the home smelled like bleach. And I asked, did you use bleach? And I was told, no, we would not do that. And I watched them on my security cameras in the house going around with their backpack and their fogging machine. So I watched them go room to room, and I wasn't really pleased with the way that they did the fogging. There were entire sections that didn't even get done. So that was kind of irking me in that moment. But once we got back home, I immediately went into what I'm going to call a flare. And it felt like my lungs were on fire and my brain was on fire. and I had to open all the windows, run the AC with the windows open for a couple of days because I couldn't handle being in the house. And my mom didn't seem too affected, but that's generally how it's always been. She, I think, has a much stronger constitution and her genetics are a little bit better than mine. My daughter, again, being nonverbal and really being in her own bubble, she wasn't able to communicate to me if anything was going on with her or not. She was just in this dreamland 100% of the time. And so I was having this extreme reaction, and the landlord kept telling me, it's fine, it's fine. You know, the remediator said it's going to go down and you're not going to be able to notice that smell in just a couple of hours, but it persisted for weeks. I could smell this chemical for weeks in the house, and the sore throat didn't go away. And I went into just a chronic state of sinus infections and respiratory infections that were antibiotic resistant. And being more of a crunchy person, I usually prefer to do as many natural therapies as I can. Any kind of remedy that I can take, like that's food-based, is always my go-to and has always worked for me. And in this situation, nothing was working. And I was going to the urgent care every week, just down the street from my house. They were amazing. Never shamed me, never bullied me, always listened to what I had to say, which was a nice change from what I had been experiencing. And they said, okay, we're going to give you a new antibiotic, and nothing would work. And eventually it did start to subside, but this went on for about 6 months. And I continued to lose weight. I continued to feel like a crazy person. And my daughter was getting sick in this period of time too. She had previously not ever had a fever, never had any type of illness of any kind. And now she was having fevers. She was having respiratory issues, breaking out in weird rashes on her body just out of nowhere. We'd go to the emergency room. They're like, we don't know what this rash is. We don't know what's caused it. It looks like this. But then when I would go back and research, it didn't look anything like that. And so it's there, are they just making things up, just because they don't know what to tell me? And so we just proceeded on this downward spiral. And it got to the point where I was walking around the house telling my mom, like, I smell musty stuff. Everywhere I go, it smells musty and I can't handle the smell. And I started to feel like I was this smell obsessed psychopath, that like the slightest odor was just going to make me lose my mind. And my mom couldn't smell any of this. And that made me feel even more crazy that I'm the only person. And my symptoms, again, just got worse and worse, to where I was having, brain fog constantly. I was dizzy constantly. The digestive stuff, it's so interesting because the first house I couldn't eat anything, but my digestive issues actually improved in this house, which tells me it was probably a different type of mold that was there. And so I could eat almost anything I wanted, thank God. But then I had all of these other issues, just horrible heart palpitations. I had pain in my legs that felt like, I don't know, bone pain. I honestly asked myself, am I having a blood clot? Am I going to die in an hour if I don't seek medical care? And the first couple times I would go to the emergency room, and they would always tell me, oh, there's nothing wrong with you. You just need some anxiety medication. You got a UTI. We're going to write a prescription for you. You're dehydrated and you really need to go see your PCP and get on some anxiety medication. I went to the same place 3 different times. And so they had a file for me. They're like, have you been to see your PCP yet to get that anxiety medication? Because in their mind, that is what was wrong with me. And only that, because my blood work that they were doing was coming back within normal range. And I continued to just have more and more symptoms, to the point that I couldn't drive my car anymore. My vertigo was so severe, it felt like my head was not attached to my body. So as I'm driving my car, I felt like I was in some weird video game where I didn't know if I was going to stay in the lane or not. And things started to feel surreal. And so I told my mom, I can't drive anymore. I need you to drive. I'm so sorry. And so I would just sit in the back seat with my daughter, and my mom coped. She did what she had to make sure I could get wherever I needed to go, because I didn't trust myself with how I was feeling. And, the symptoms just kept getting weirder and weirder. muscle twitching. I even was taking video of the spasms in my leg and sending them to my friends because I didn't want them to think I was crazy. Because when you're going through something like this, where you have no idea what's happening to you, you're scared. And you're reaching out to every person that you possibly can for either comfort or, for them to say, yeah, I've experienced that too. And I was okay. Just any type of, comfort that I could get, I would try to get it. But then I would be met with, well, did you sleep last night? Are you getting enough rest? And so I'd send them these videos. Look, I'm telling you, this is what's happening. And I have no control over this. And it hurts. And so people were starting to get worried about me. And I, of course, I had lost confidence in myself. And I had kind of come to the conclusion that I either have a rare form of cancer that just hasn't been diagnosed yet. I just haven't found the right person to look at all of my symptoms and tell me, oh, yeah, you have this. And this is why you're so sick. Or I really was starting to lose my mind. And I went through this period of just such despair and darkness that, I started listening to all of these motivational speakers. I'd put Joe Dispenza on and I would try to walk around the block with my daughter in the stroller and tell myself, like, you're doing this to yourself. For whatever reason, you're trapped in this cycle of anxiety and depression, and you have to snap out of it. Because if you don't, you're not going to have anything left. And it was very scary because I continued to lose weight and got to a weight that I've never been before as an adult. And just to be constantly told, well, you've got anxiety and that's the cause of all of this was really, really hard. And then watching my daughter on top of all of this, we finally took her to a pediatrician to get another opinion, a different doctor. And she looked at my daughter, and after evaluating her, and this was a very traumatic experience for me, her and her dad, I said, what is going on with her? And she said, well, she's on the spectrum. I mean, this, that, everything she's doing, that's all spectrum based. And I said, okay, why is this happening? Why do you say my daughter's on the spectrum? And she said, well, it could be because you're not feeding her properly. And that was like a stab in the heart. Just, it shattered me. And I told her, I said, you realize my daughter will not eat anything. She only wants what she wants. I give her all different types of food. And she said, well, but the lack of nutrition could be why she's on the spectrum. So I don't want to officially diagnose her yet, because if you need to start giving her proper food. And, that was just like, that was devastating to me, that I could be the reason that she has autism. I could be the reason that she has all of these health problems. And I told the doctor, I said, before all of these things started happening, my daughter would eat everything that I was eating. Whatever we cooked for dinner, I learned from the other moms who came before me, don't just, give in to what your child wants. Give them what you're eating from the very beginning and train them so that they'll eat what you're eating and get them on a good path. And so I was doing that. And she loved everything that we had for dinner and breakfast and lunch every day, always something different, until we started getting sick. And then she only wanted fruit, or she only wanted pasta, and that was it. And her milk. And this pediatrician just blamed me. And now I look back and I say, okay, if a child has autism, they have sensory issues. So they're going to have issues with certain textures and types of food and the way things look. And so I felt failed by this doctor. And in that moment, I didn't really know what else to do. I looked at her as an expert and I said, okay, you're telling me what you think. And I have validation now that there is something different about my daughter. Nobody wanted to acknowledge it. They just kept blaming COVID and lockdowns, but no, there's actually something going on with her. And so it was a little bit of validation and a lot of trauma. And so her advice was only feed her one option until she chooses to eat it. She won't starve herself. I know kids, they won't starve themselves. And so for 2 days, my daughter chose not to eat a single thing, and to be in a constant state of screaming and tantrums and crying, before she finally cracked and she ate some ground beef and some tomato sauce. And that was, such a victory, but it was also incredibly sad. And I look back now, knowing all the things that I know about autism and children that have pandas and that are mold sick. And I feel like a horrible mom for putting my daughter through that period because it wasn't her fault. And I regret that I went to a doctor that didn't understand, that couldn't look at my daughter and all of her symptoms, look at me and hear my story and kind of say, what about mold? Maybe this is something we need to look into. And instead, she shamed me as her mom and made me the reason why she was exhibiting the behaviors that she was exhibiting. So it really, that was the summer before I found out that mold truly was the cause of everything that was going on. And so we had that botched remediation. That was in February of that year. And in December, the mold that had been in my mom's bedroom ceiling had come back, which they had only sprayed with bleach. They said it wasn't bleach, but it 100% was bleach. And it came back, and that's when I picked up the phone and I made a phone call to hire my own mold inspector and to get my own consultant to come out on my behalf rather than the landlord's person. Because at that point, my brain was just kind of like, did that person lie? Did he pay him, to not tell the truth? There's something more going on here. And once we had that mold inspection done, everything changed. Everything changed.
How did everything change?
I was validated. My inspector came in, didn't dismiss all the areas that I had asked the previous inspector a year before to look at and tell me, oh, that's not anything to worry about. You don't need to focus on that. The air vents that were dirty, that's not mold, that's just dirt. You just got to get a paper towel and wipe it. This new inspector came in and said, no, that looks like mold. I'm going to take a sample. And they're like, there's water damage here? Yeah. Okay, let's put a camera in the wall. And they put a camera in the wall. And that moment, that was the single defining moment for me where I started shaking uncontrollably and crying because here's my inspector with a camera in the wall showing me live on the camera feed, black colored mold, a foot or two up the wall, 3 feet away from where I had been sleeping. This drywall looked pristine. You wouldn't have known that there was anything going on in that shower cavity where that plumbing was between my master bathroom and my bedroom, other than the water damage around the baseboard inside of the bathroom. There was no damage in the bedroom side of that wall. But putting the camera in, that moment was, for over 2 years, I felt like a complete crazy person. I didn't have friends that believed me. I didn't have family that believed me. Everything was put back on me having anxiety. I'd gone to the emergency room so many times, shaking, uncontrollable diarrhea, almost to the point of vomiting on some occasions. And each time I was just told, it's just your anxiety. The rash on my face that nobody could explain, other than it might be lupus. Everything came crashing in at that moment when I saw on that camera what was happening in my wall cavity. And all the times I had been told I was crazy because I could smell things that no one else could smell. And because I was having reactions that nobody else, my poor mom, I know she thought that she was losing me to some kind of mental illness, because I would wake her up at night crying because I would be in so much pain. And I was scared because I didn't want to die and not be there for my daughter anymore, because I really, truly thought that I was going to die in these moments where my flares would be so bad and so scary, and the pain would be so severe that ibuprofen wouldn't touch it, and not having any answers. And so seeing on the camera in that moment that there was a demon in my wall 3 feet away from my daughter, and I had been sleeping, and it wasn't just there. It was all over the house. It was all throughout my HVAC system. It was in all of the ducts. Every single moment of doubting myself while living in that house. Every single moment of terror, and calling my best friend who is a paramedic, telling her I think I'm having a blood clot. I don't know what to do. Like these crazy phone calls that I was making to people trying to get help and answers, and everybody just like, I don't think you're having a blood clot. I think you're okay. All of it finally made sense. And I finally had this little glimmer of hope that maybe I could get better. Maybe the thought that I had been having with God every night, like maybe it would be okay if I just died and I just didn't wake up tomorrow. That thought didn't have to become a reality. It was like a validation explosion. So while it was extremely upsetting to see that and to get all of this, great one-on-one feedback from my inspector, and for me to go tell my mom, oh my gosh, come look, you have to see this. There's a reason why all of this has been happening. It was traumatic, but also a victory, because it meant that starting tomorrow, I could be on my path to getting better. And that maybe my daughter, maybe this is why she has autism. Maybe this is why she has pandas. Maybe this is why she lost her ability to speak. And that's just like, just being given hope that maybe everything can change and get better. It's priceless. It's absolutely priceless. And so, sitting down with my inspector and her telling me, okay, this is what you need to do. And she was wonderful. She said, tell me all of your symptoms. What is going on with you? And, with her training and background of understanding how mold impacts people, she was able to tell me right away, this house is making you sick. This is why you're not getting any better. You need to leave. And she said, you really need to leave tonight so you can start to get better right now. And I told her, I was like, that sounds crazy to me. I can't do that. I have to process everything that's happening and figure out a plan. And she's like, okay, but just please promise me you're going to try to get out of here sooner rather than later. And I said, I will. Thank you for showing me all of this. Thank you for confirming what this little voice had been telling me for the last 6 months, which is crazy. This is what's so crazy about all of this is that there was mold in the house that we had remediated, and I still had not woken up enough to say, maybe there's more mold in this house. Maybe that wasn't done correctly. And so that started my exit strategy and my battle with my landlord and the process of, where are we going to go? What are we going to do? How are we going to get out of this situation? And it resulted in us walking away from everything that we had. There was a lot of things we probably could have kept, but I was too sick. And as a single mom, my mom being in her 70s and all of us having health issues, I couldn't imagine setting up, a decontamination factory in my driveway and garage to try. I just didn't have the physical strength to do that. And so we ended up having Stachybotrys, Chaetomium, and Aspergillus and Cladosporium to varying levels throughout the house. And after, basically, as soon as the mold inspector left, I started doing my research and trying to figure out what to do. I also went through a period of denial where it felt too ridiculous. Everything felt too ridiculous. And I started this crazy story in my head that maybe the inspector never really came and maybe none of this really happened. And my mom was like, no, it happened. It happened and I can't stop thinking about it. But once we actually got out, once we got rid of everything, and we finally got to our safe place, if you want to call it that, because I don't think there's truly any safe place. There's safer places. Once we got to the safest place we had been in a while, which was a new construction rental, within just a couple days, we all developed a really crazy respiratory infection that lasted about a week. And after that, it was like, we were so much better. We were so much better. And my daughter was acknowledging people. Her cousins, for the first time, she was holding their hand and making eye contact with them. people were not invisible to her. And that's when I knew, okay, it was the mold that did this all along. It shrouded my daughter in a cloud, in a fog that she couldn't see past. She had so much inflammation in her brain that she was cloaked. And the real girl that was in there, no one could see her and she couldn't get out and she didn't know how to communicate anything. And suddenly she was just blossoming. And so for the last year and a half, we've been on this process of this journey of finding permanent safe housing, discovering that family members have severe mold in their homes, and navigating that with them, and trying to help anybody that we possibly can, as well as protecting ourselves as we go through this detox period. It's very traumatic, and I still feel like a lunatic a lot. And we have such crazy protocols here where we have family members that want to come over. They have to put on different clothes when they get here if they are coming from a moldy house, because my crazy nose can smell the mold on their clothes when they walk in the door. And so I've gone through a period of having reactions, seeing my daughter regress literally within hours. All of her aggression comes back, the temper tantrums, the just anger will come out if she's re-exposed to mold. And so we have to be so careful. And it's a lot of work. It's like a mental workout every single day, but we're getting better because of the protections that we're putting in place, trying to avoid mold as much as we possibly can. But I feel so blessed to be where I'm at now and to be in a position where I can take everything that I've experienced and turn around and help other people and let them know you're not crazy. I don't care how many doctors told you that. You're not crazy. And just to see the growth in my daughter, the progression to wellness and healing, it's a bit of a roller coaster for sure, but she's getting better. And she said, "Mommy," for the first time a couple months ago, after not being able to make any sounds that start with the letter M for years, to finally be able to say that it's just so many blessings have come out of this, but it's been a big journey. And it's hard too, being in this position that I'm in now as executive director for Malachi's Message, because I'm meeting people who've had it so much worse than we had it, so much worse. And my heart shatters sometimes on a daily basis because of what people are experiencing and not having the support that they need from family, from coworkers, from neighbors, from landlords. It's just, this is such a big issue and people don't realize it. Our society doesn't understand mold. And so I'm just a huge advocate for telling people, share your story. Don't be afraid to share it. The more we talk about our personal experiences, the more we talk about being gaslighted, being misunderstood, having, even being shamed in some cases, like I was so many times when I went to the doctor. If we tell our story, people are going to hear that. And then hopefully little by little, we'll create change to where society starts to understand mold and accept it and see that this is a really serious issue that does affect people. It affects their health. It affects their physical and mental and emotional health. It affects our children. I could just go on and on about it.
Did you ever go back to that one doctor who shamed you to let her know what the culprit really was?
I did not. I've gone back and forth on that. I feel like I was treated really, really poorly. And I'm just not sure if it's worth my time or not. I've definitely thought about it. I have had two other doctors that did say, is mold potentially an issue that I want to go back to and thank, because they planted a little seed. Even though I didn't have the money at the time to explore through testing with them what was going on, they planted important seeds and they asked the right questions that, even though I wasn't ready to really fully explore that, it definitely stayed in the back of my mind. And now I can come back and say, gosh, I wish maybe they had pushed me a little bit more, because maybe I would have had answers sooner. But yeah, there's so many things I want to say to so many people, and it's hard to keep up. I think more than anything, I'm just trying to focus on my daughter and just pour whatever I can into her, because I look at our situation and I say, I can still talk. I didn't lose that ability. There's a lot that I did lose that I'm regaining. My vocabulary suffered for quite a while, and I was forgetting things and couldn't, pinpoint what words I wanted to use when I was speaking or explaining things. But I still say I'm blessed though, because my daughter lost everything, and I want her to really thrive and succeed now. So whatever I can do to help her, that's what I'm focusing on. And maybe I'll get to me soon.
If there's one thing that you want people to know from what you've learned or anything about mold before we, finish your story, what would that be?
Oh my gosh.
I know there's probably a lot.
There's a lot. Yeah. I think the biggest takeaway is, don't tell yourself that you know what mold is or that you understand anything about it, because I'm going to tell you, you don't. It's worth exploring and understanding and researching, because as a society, we have been taught that mold is something that you can just spray with bleach or like mold and mildew killer that you buy at the store and wipe it up and it's fine. Sometimes it is as easy as that, right? It's a non-porous surface, sure. But if there's something going on, like what was happening in both of the homes that I was living in, where there's a hidden mold issue, that is not something that you can just spray with bleach. And that's the wrong idea. You never want to use bleach to begin with. And there's mold can bring you down. It's just as terrifying as any other illness that you can get when you become mold sick. It can lead to cancer. It can lead to all types of autoimmune issues, hormonal issues, neurological issues. My daughter to this day stims like crazy. She has neurological tics. She can be in the middle of smiling pleasantly and then her face completely contorts and she has no control over it. And, her brain is inflamed because of hidden mold. So take whatever ideas that you have about mold, whatever you've learned, and just wipe the slate clean and try to learn as much as you can about it, because it's not what you think it is.
Thank you, Mariam, seriously, for coming on today and sharing your personal story with us. And I hope a lot of people will learn, what you just said is they need to go research it, because it is a big deal. It's a big issue. And it could be the source of why somebody in their house is not getting better.
100%. It's been my pleasure to share my story. I hope it does help someone. So thank you.